Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at how the rich are getting richer at the opening of the World Economic Forum in Davos, a report compiled by economists showing on the eve of that summit how those 85 richest people in the world have wealth that's equivalent to 3.5 billion people on the planet. With us to talk about it from Davos, Felix Marquardt, co-founder of Europeans Now. Welcome back to the show. She's the author of We the Peoples of Europe. Susan George, anti-globalization activist with the group Attack. And also with us, Michel, OGRIZEK, former head of communications for the World Economic Forum, and from Brussels, business consultant Sony KAPOOR. We were discussing before the break about what the numbers actually mean. There was consensus about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. The numbers, no huge surprise. The top 1% in the United States, for instance, making 20% of the money. Now you see, this is the period in blue there is from 2008 to 2012. In green, what you see is what was back in 1980, and you see the difference in the United States. The United States is more than 20%. Notice the gap is much, much narrower when it comes to France. Felix Marquardt, France sometimes gets a hard time on this show for the way that the taxes are high, the social welfare state, and perhaps criticized, especially by entrepreneurs. But it seems, when you look at those numbers, more redistributive, and there is less of a gap between rich and poor.
Yeah, it is the case, and I think that France, in some respects, has managed to keep a gap that is more respectable than the one that you find in many other countries. You know, kudos to the French on that. Nonetheless, for me, a country that fares only slightly worse than most when things are doing badly, and that fares miserably when everyone else is doing well, can't purport to have a model. What we have here in Davos are indeed mostly people from the top 1%, but I think you have the wrong target if you think that the 1% that are represented here are the ones that want to keep that gap growing. Among the people who are gathered at Davos, you have among the most powerful and richest people who want to reduce that gap. The people who don't want that gap to be reduced are the ones who don't come to Davos.
You're saying that the people who are there want the gap to be reduced. People
Absolutely.
They get cynical when they see discussions like this, because then they say, "Oh yeah, because they want tax write-offs, and in any case, it's PR." What do you answer to that?
I think that actually the World Economic Forum, contrary to what it's often depicted as, is actually an extraordinarily apt metaphor of the way the world is evolving. 40 years ago, the Forum looked indeed very much like something like the Congress of Berlin, where you had colonial powers gathered to divide the riches of the world behind the backs of the people, of the masses. But that was corrected, and in the 80s you started seeing newcomers like Brazil and China and Russians and Africans join the table, but I would say it was still, to a large extent, the periphery coming to greet and pay homage to the center. But what you're seeing now, the hottest currency these days in Davos are not big multinationals from the West. The hottest currency in Davos are the parties thrown by Indonesia, South Africa, Malaysia, Mongolia, Thailand. They are the gatherings organized by startuppers from Bangalore to Shanghai to Sao Paulo. And who are the people in the West? Who do they think they are? Those who basically dispute the fact that now that we have all these new players at the table, we should be questioning the entire system. It's scandalous, I find, in terms of wealth creation, because at the end of the day, this is how we create wealth. And at the same time, it's scandalous because at the end of the day, what the anti-globalization movement is losing track of the fact that the new guys in globalization are the underprivileged of yesterday.
Susan George?
Well, I want to say, first of all, that I don't know anyone in the alter globalization movement, not anti-alter, a different kind of globalization, who could say that they don't want small startups to succeed and succeed wildly. That simply isn't the case. Most money now is not made in startups. I wish it were. I wish it were small and medium businesses that were doing very well. They're not. The European Central Bank says, and has said for 5 years, that every single trimester they're getting fewer loans and credit is tightening. So that's not where the money is really coming from. Those are the people who employ you, but where the money is coming from is in the financial transactions, which have increased by 40% since the beginning of the crisis. Derivatives are going wild all over the map, also up by 40% since the year before the crisis. And what we have to look at with inequality is the fact that everybody suffers from it, including the rich, because it creates societies in which there is, and this is all statistically proven, more crime, more young delinquents, greater prison populations, more physical and mental illnesses, more obesity, more of everything that you do not want in a society. And this is something that then people will have to go into their gated communities, and they will have to live 1,000,000 miles away from the people who live 5 or 10 miles from them. And these people are also naturally those who go on to drugs, go on to alcohol, unwanted pregnancies. Everything you don't want is increased by inequality. And so in the list of the developed countries, it's the United States that has the most of all of these horrible phenomena, and Britain after that, and then down at the bottom, Europe is doing better, that's true, but it's getting the coefficients are going up to show that Europe is also, unfortunately, getting more unequal.
Felix, Marquardt?
Yeah, well, I think that indeed we should, again, my point is simply to say that the people most able to reduce, in a position to reduce the inequalities that we are all appalled by, frankly, those people are gathered here, or many of them are gathered here. And I think it's wrong to think that basically because they are part of the 1%, they are not genuinely interested in improving the situation of the people around the world who are living on $1 or $2 a day.
Let me ask Sony KAPOOR in Brussels. Wind back the clock to 2008, 2009. The politicians had a go at it with those G20 summits that came about, and we see that the income inequality is nonetheless still growing. Do you agree with Felix Marquardt that the people who are best apt to find the answer to these growing inequalities are the ones that are gathering in Davos?
Well, yes and no. Let me just clarify a couple of things. First, the idea that it is the billionaires from the poorer countries, Indonesia, India, China, etc., who hold the future in their hands and are very benign sources of reducing inequality and poverty. I think that is a very deeply flawed notion. I would very seriously, having worked both in the developed and developing world, say that the plutocrats, if I may use that word, from developing countries have much more in common with the billionaires out of the rich world. And they live in increasingly isolated, I think Susan George mentioned, 1,000,000 miles away from their local community, both in their aspirations, their lifestyle and habitat. They live 1,000,000 miles away from the communities that they grow up in. And this is one of the consequences of globalization. The second part, I think at an abstract level, I completely agree. Many of the people gathered in the World Economic Forum today, including many friends of mine, are very enlightened individuals who have, through their individual actions, tried to address many of these problems. But I think there is a big step between wanting at an abstract level to address the problem and recognize that inequality is a very serious social, but actually very serious economic problem too. So there is a big step between recognizing that and actually then advocating what is a natural solution, saying let's have very high levels of estate taxes. Let's have much higher levels of wealth taxes and income taxes. And I think with the exception of George Soros, who has said explicitly that high taxes are necessary, there are very few people who will take that next logical step of translating the abstract need to do this into actually policies that affect them personally. The important part to consider is that be it either for the social and the health and the reasons that that Susan referred to of inequality being bad in itself for societies, it is of course very important that these billionaires cannot continue to be billionaires if this inequality is not addressed, because the global economy is suffering from a structural lack of demand. The hollowing out of the middle class, the rising inequality means that there is a shrinking base of population to demand the goods that these corporate titans are able to sell to actually make the money. And the last point I want to make is that it is important to distinguish between the different kinds of billionaires now. In particular, I want to single out those who have benefited from rent-seeking, and this is where the new billionaires, particularly when Russia privatized its assets, and similar things have happened in India and Brazil when liberalization has come in. People who have become billionaires, not as a virtue of having developed some new product that is very useful or new technology, but simply because their political connections. And I think that is a wholly pernicious development. And the second part, which is particularly pernicious, is billionaires who have emerged from the financial sector, because at an aggregate level, the net contribution of this financial sector to the global economy is very limited. And in both of these cases, these are cases of rent-seeking. And the absolute last point to make here is that the problems really arise when this wealth starts influencing policy making. And the nexus between wealth and power, we've known it historically, is very strong. And this is the stage the world is in, where at a collective level, the people who have the money have a disproportionate influence on policies that could actually be used to address some of these problems. And this is why we have a massive paralysis of policy making, not addressing the single biggest challenge facing us, which is inequality at this pernicious levels.
Money talks, as the adage goes. You were mentioning the sensitive issue of income redistribution, in other words, higher taxes. One of the main talking points of that report by Oxfam is how the rich avoid paying those taxes. They say it's $18.5 trillion worth. So again, I'll put this to you, Michel OGRIZEK. These are recurring themes we've been hearing about for 20 years. We're going to crack down on tax havens. We're going to reduce income inequality. When the crisis hit in 2008, 2009, at the time, did you think, okay, this time we're going to do something about it?
So first of all, I want to say that I will not question the commitment of the participant to improve the wealth of the world. But taxes, net taxes. Today, the middle class is supporting the most taxes in the world. As soon as you get a little of money, okay, as a salary, or you begin to be, I would say, part of the middle class, okay, you are the one who pays the taxes. So that's the issue. Not only they are shrinking the middle class, but they also overtax the middle class, even in France nowadays. No,
that's
what I want
the middle class has a fixed address.
Yes, I think I would like to look a little bit at the history. You know, all what we talk about was born in 1952 with Mr. Sauvy and Lacoste. We had underdeveloped countries, and we will bring the growth, and the wealth to this underdeveloped, and they became developing country, and now we call them emerging countries.
But again, we don't need to go back that far.
No.
2008, 2009, at that point, did you think, okay, this time we're going to do something about it?
I don't think so. Why? Because the forces in place, the financial forces in place, will lead what I'm calling a third worldization of the world. All the planet will become a vast third world. What does it mean? A third rich people, very rich, a third middle class, mostly in Asia or in emerging markets, okay, China, Brazil, okay, paying too much tax, by the way, in Brazil, which explained a lot of demonstration recently, okay, and a third very poor. Everybody celebrates that you earn $1 10 years ago, $1 a day, and now you earn $2 a day. Oh, gosh, what's the results, okay? So everybody say growth is good, okay, is good for developing wealth of everybody. This is not true. If you look at the third...
Is what you're describing a fatality? Is this the way it has to be?
I'm describing it's a fatality if we don't do something about it. If we don't find a civilization alternative to it. Why? I mean, look, infrastructure in the US is like third world country. Look, education, functional illiteracy in our countries is huge. 50% of people in the US don't understand what they write, what they listen to, okay? If you look at the health, access to the healthcare, if you look at the young population, if you look at dependence on debt, if you look at all the criteria of third world, we are in a third worldization of the planet, all over the planet.
All right, Sony, KAPOOR.
Can I just add one thing too?
Yes, I think that is completely correct, and I do want to re-emphasize that this artificial distinction between the developed and developing world, etc., no longer holds, and it is much more about within these societies, those who have rent-seeking opportunities, those who have locked in regulations that allow them to continue to seek more rent, those who have locked in political influence and are able to transfer power intergenerationally. Those are the pernicious forces that one needs to tackle. And in that sense, the challenges in the United States on the one hand, and the challenges in India on the other are similar in nature, perhaps different in magnitude. I think there was a report about the average wealth of the member of the Chinese Congress, the Chinese Parliament, comparing that to the average wealth of the member of the US Senate and US Congress. And if I remember correctly, the average parliamentarian in China is at least about 10 times richer than the average parliamentarian in the United States, with particular concentration of billionaires. And so in that sense, the challenges being faced by developing countries, which on the one hand have a poorer middle class, poorer, really poor parts of society living at $1 or $2 a day, combined with the rich emerging class, which is no less rich than Bill Gates or George Soros or others are in the United States, the difference in power between those, the difference in wealth between those is something that has rarely been seen before in history. Some of this will self-correct as the political classes emerge, the middle class emerge, and is still emerging in some of these places. But particularly because of things such as the avoidance of taxes, the fact that these billionaires and plutocrats feel that they have very little to do with the societies they came from, but instead view the billionaires in other countries as their peer group. The fact that they will not voluntarily agree to do what had happened before in history, I think therein lies a huge problem.
All right, and we have a comment on Facebook from Moses saying the focus of our leaders and global thinkers should not be about how we share what is available, but how we create more of what is possible. Would you agree? Do you agree?
I agree that everybody should have a good education and good health and be in a position to create more wealth. But then I think once that wealth is created, which it is being created at a very high rate now, but it's all going to the top 1%. 96% in the United States since the beginning of the crisis, according to Paul Krugman. What people don't remember, probably, is that under a Republican president in the United States, Eisenhower, the top slice of income was taxed at 90%. The rich in the United States always complain about taxes, but at least the society was in better shape equality-wise,
Okay.
in
François,
the way it was run. And we are also not taxing because so much money can escape. The middle class is being taxed. Our colleague is right, but that is because they have a fixed address. It's the very rich that have the lawyers, that have the accountants who can spirit that money away so that they don't have to deal with the laws that ordinary people have to deal with.
Felix Marquardt.
I mean, the problem is that the countries that are best at redistributing wealth are basically the shittiest at creating it. So you can tell me as much as you want that indeed there's enough wealth being created. I can give you a very simple example. In France, the average growth in the past 30 years is under 1%. When you're creating that kind of wealth, talking about redistributing it ad nauseum is, I'm sorry, masturbation. So it depends where you are. And I think, to get back to what Sony was saying, I agree with everything you said. But you make a very important distinction between plutocrats and a whole bunch of so-called emerging countries, very inaptly so named, and people from Western countries, billionaires, that are behaving extraordinarily and radically differently. And so I think, let's just remember, Davos is gathering vastly more people of the second sort than of the plutocrats.
Michel OGRIZEK.
Yes, I think we are living, Felix, under the myth of growth. I mean, every time you ask CEOs or you ask politicians, they target growth. Growth is plenty of mouth, growth. What about growth, okay? Emerging market was a pocket of growth. Now, as we know, is declining a little bit, is not. And they will create an internal market which will not benefit to the rest of the world, probably, on the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. Innovation, they have innovation as a key word of growth. Breakthrough innovation, yes, but most of them, they are creating incremental innovation. Look, Apple, how it's declining. They can't find a new breakthrough innovation. New technology, 3D printing and so on. What about, the new jobs or green economy, a source of new growth, okay? Solar panels are made in China, most of them, okay? And the nuclear industry, anyway, we will have to take care about the waste. So what does it mean? We are living on a growth myth. What is more important is to understand how we change the way we create alternative and redistribution of wealth, not by taking to the richest to give to the poorest, which is a French attitude, but how to create a civilization which share the global benefit of what we are doing, producing, consuming.
But you agree that you need to give, you need the state to intervene a minimum amount, and that costs money, as Susan George was saying, pay for education, this sort of thing.
I would like to send a good message to Davos, maybe. I will just quote and finish with that Mr. Woolbridge, a U.S. economist, an American economist. He reported in a book that he has an Indian friend who told him, "You did live in an artificial world. It's time that you come back to reality and live now like we at the poverty level of the third world." That's a key challenge today, that we become all in a system which create third world situation and not wealth situation for everybody.
Felix Marquardt, we're almost out of time. I just want to ask you, one of the organizers of Davos saying that the world is still too much caught in a crisis management mode. When you're in Davos, do you feel like you're lurching from one crisis to the other?
From one crisis to the other, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't don't know where that quote is coming from. I couldn't say that. No, I think that what we're seeing is people trying to adapt to a change, to a world that, sorry for saying something so banal, but I think that people underestimate how even the most connected so-called richest, most powerful people in the world are taken aback by the rate of change that our times induces. I think everyone's trying to get a grip on what the hell is happening and where is this acceleration of change going to end. And the answer is, unfortunately, it's going to be much more about adapting than anything else.
All right, dizzying change.
Economists know about something called the Wagner curve, which shows that the greater the public spending, the higher the level of civilization in a country.
All right,
this
so
has been proven over and over again.
Different
and you
points
only
of view
get
on
that
that.
through redistribution of wealth. Fair,
I'm sorry, but if that were true,
we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. I want to thank you, Susan George.
Stalin's Russia would be heaven.
I want to thank you, Felix Marquardt. I want to thank Sony KAPOOR in Brussels and also Michel OGRIZEK for being with us. Thank you for joining us here for the France 24 debate.